3.4%, but pay for it by stopping the overcharging of students to help pay for the health care law. Mr. President, I thank the President and I yield the floor.
Mr. President.
Senator from Arizona.
Mr. President, first let me say I very much appreciate the comments of the Senator from Tennessee and his leadership on this issue. And I join him in hoping that we'll be able to vote for the alternative that he's provided, which is a more sensible way to ensure that this increase in student loan interest fees does not continue. You know, many students who entered college maybe 4 or 5 years ago believing that higher education would improve their prospects for getting a good job are now, sadly, very disappointed. The Obama economy is going to let them down. According to a recent Associated Press story, 1 out of 2 recent graduates are either unemployed or underemployed. The article cites a new analysis based on government data which found that young college graduates, I'm quoting now, are heavily represented in jobs that require a high school diploma or less. That's confounding their hopes a degree would pay off despite higher tuition and mounting student loans, end of quote. At this time, most of us agree that Congress should extend the lower interest rate on certain Stafford loans. Unless we do, interest rates will double to 6.8% this July. And there are competing proposals to accomplish this extension, as Senator Alexander pointed out. Unfortunately, the majority leader's proposal is going to make this underlying jobs problem worse by burdening job-creating businesses with new taxes and compliance costs. Let me illustrate how this occurs. In order to pay for the $6 billion cost of extending the 3.4% interest rates for 1 year, the Reid bill attempts to do what nearly every bill proposed by Senate Democrats this session has done. It permanently raises taxes on job creators in order to pay for temporary spending. And worse, the majority is attempting to divert dollars that are supposed to go to Medicare or Social Security in order to fund completely unrelated spending. In this case, the legislation singles out certain professional service businesses for a punitive tax hike, including those in the fields of health, engineering, architecture, accounting, actuarial science, performing arts, and athletics. Ironically, these are some of the fields where there is actually demand for new employees, according to the AP story that I referenced earlier. The tax hike would hit business owners who perform services for their businesses and make $200,000, or if they're married, $250,000. If the IRS determines that 75% or more of the business's gross income is what this bill describes as attributable to the services of 3 or fewer owners, then this bill would make the owners pay payroll taxes on 100% of their share of the business profits, even if some of that profit had nothing to do with the owner's work. In addition, if family members also owned a piece of the business, then the working owner will owe additional payroll taxes on the family member's share of the business, even if that family member pays or provides no services. Obviously, there are several problems with this approach. Let's start with the most obvious. It takes more money from the private sector and gives it to the government at the very time when we want the private sector to have enough to create new jobs. Second, it rewrites the laws of income from labor and income from capital investment. And this should not be done lightly, especially since confiscating more from small businesses means that they will be less able to expand and create more jobs. Underscoring that this proposal is a tax increase and not a mere compliance measure, a coalition of 37 organizations that represent small businesses wrote a letter explaining, and I quote, that it could increase the payroll tax burden on business owners who are already fully complying with the law. For those businesses, this provision represents a tax increase rather than a clarification of existing tax burdens. Mr. President, I ask unanimous consent that the text of this letter be printed in the record at the conclusion of my remarks.
Without objection.
Thank you. So, a bill that's intended to help students would actually make their job prospects even bleaker when they graduate. As the American Institute of Architects said of the Reid proposal, quote, "If we're trying to make it easier for our college graduates to get started in their career and become contributing members of society, increasing taxes on those who would most likely hire them is simply bad public policy," end of quote. And payroll taxes are already scheduled to become more punitive for the small business owners targeted by this bill. Under Obamacare, the Medicare portion of their payroll tax will rise from 2.9% to 3.8%, and another 3.8% will be assessed on their investment income. To add insult to injury, this bill exposes family-owned businesses to double taxation. For example, in a business with 3 family member shareholders, in which only 2 provide substantial services, those 2 family members would be responsible for payroll taxes on their own incomes, and then both of them would have to pay payroll taxes on the income of their 3rd family member. Applying this rising payroll tax to even more small business income is a terrible recipe in time of a weak economy. At a time when businesses are struggling to hire, the last thing Congress should do is to make a bad situation worse. Now, the other side will argue that their bill is intended to prevent cases of tax abuse. So let's look into that. According to the IRS, 4.5 million S-corporation tax returns were filed in 2009. Data from the Treasury Department shows that S-corporations account for nearly 40% of small businesses with employees. As these numbers show, doing business as an S-corporation is popular because it allows a business to avoid the double taxation of income that comes with organizing as a C-corporation. The business income of these and other so-called flow-through organizations is taxed as individual income by IRS. Given the prevalence of flow-through businesses in our economy, it's not surprising that there's been some abuse from some S-corp shareholders who pay themselves small salaries in order to avoid paying Medicare and Social Security payroll taxes owed on their compensation. IRS is well aware of this potential and has developed and implemented tools to go after firms and individuals who do not pay appropriate payroll taxes through what the IRS calls the reasonable compensation test. This test has been used for over 50 years, and the IRS has won a number of cases against taxpayers who paid themselves compensation that was deemed less than reasonable, most recently in last year's U.S. versus Watson decision. The Reid bill would impose a different standard, one that is arguably more confusing and less enforceable than the current IRS reasonable compensation test. Under the Reid bill, small businesses and the IRS will be asked to determine whether 75% of the small business income is, quote, attributable to the services of 3 or fewer shareholders. Now, how on earth is IRS going to determine which income is attributable to the work of a particular shareholder and not to other employees or to capital investments? For example, if a business, let's say, has 3 physical therapists, how will the IRS know whether the business's income is substantially due to their services or whether at least part of it relates to the fact that they hired talented front office staff, did marketing, bought a building in good location, have a comfortable waiting room, implemented an efficient billing system, and invested in state-of-the-art medical equipment? And let's say that an IRS agent manages to determine that exactly 75% of the business income is attributable to the services of the 3 physical therapists. That means 25% of the business income was not due to their services. But the bill would impose payroll taxes on that portion as well. In other words, this bill would impose taxes on business income that is due to capital investment, which should not be subject to the payroll tax, and to the work of other employees who have already paid their payroll taxes. Payroll taxes should only apply to labor income, and they should only be applied once. That's current IRS policy, and it's good policy. As one commentator noted last week, the Reid proposal will be a jobs program for tax lawyers defending clients before the IRS. To determine what percentage of business income is attributable to services performed by certain shareholders of an S corporation will be a boon for lawyers and CPAs, but not for the professional service businesses that wish to expand and hire. Those of us who were here in 2010 argued against Obamacare, among other reasons, because it relied on student loans to pay for part of its costs. A more prudent way to extend the 3.4% interest rate on student loans is to cut at least $6 billion in Obamacare spending, which is exactly what the House of Representatives recently voted to do. The House bill would cut spending from an unaccountable Obamacare slush fund, formerly known as the Prevention and Public Health Fund. This approach, which our colleague Senator Alexander spoke to a moment ago, and of which I'm a co-sponsor, fully offsets the cost of a one-year extension of the subsidized interest rate and directs an additional $6 billion toward debt reduction. This ensures that job-creating capital will not be diverted from small businesses to fund a temporary, unrelated spending program. Notably, President Obama's own budget request recommended cutting this very same Obamacare slush fund, and he's already signed into law legislation that cut $5 billion from it. Finally, Mr. President, I want to express my dismay at the lack of urgency from the majority about the most pressing issue facing small businesses and these college graduates seeking work, and that's the automatic tax increase for all Americans on January 1st of next year, the largest tax increase in the history of our country. The legislation on the floor today will not become law. The majority knows that. It's another political show vote. We know this because this chamber rejected a similar hike 2 years ago when the majority had 59 Senate seats, and we know the House of Representatives would not pass the legislation. As the senior senator from Utah noted last month, Senate Democrats are fiddling while Rome burns. That's because in just 8 months, as I said, the largest tax increase in American history will take effect on individuals, families, and businesses. Taxes on income, capital gains, dividends, family-owned farms, estates will skyrocket. As previously mentioned, new taxes on investment and payroll from Obamacare will also take effect. Even without the tax increase in this Reid bill, small business owners are facing a marginal tax increase to nearly 41%, a regular payroll tax rising to 16.2%, and an additional 3.8% payroll tax on investment income. And we want these people to hire more, to create more jobs. Instead of wasting valuable time on a bill that will never become law, I hope my colleagues on the other side of the aisle will end their obsession with class warfare and start focusing on the most pressing issue at hand, stopping the policies that will do further damage to our already weak economy. Defeating the majority leader's latest tax hike proposal will be a good place to start.
Mr. President?
Senator from Wyoming.
Mr. President, there's no reason we're having this debate today. Freezing student loan interest rates for 1 year during tough economic times is something I believe we all agree on. So it should be relatively simple to accomplish. The President supports it, Governor Romney supports it, and a bipartisan majority in both the House and the Senate support it. Given this kind of agreement, I see no reason why both sides could not have a good faith discussion on where to find $6 billion in savings in a government with a budget that spends nearly $2 trillion annually. Actually, we spend more than $2 trillion annually. Now, I would mention that this bill has not been to committee. I hope that the American people have noticed that bills that go to committee and then come to the floor are usually successful. I hope they've also noticed that bills that don't go to committee and come to the floor are usually not successful. They're usually a political statement, and that's what we've got here again today. And this is how it works. You bring a bill that you know the other side has already, well, in fact, this body has already voted on this concept of this tax before and defeated it. But they know that we're particularly upset about this kind of discrimination against the businesses that are starting the jobs in America. So they know that with that provision in there, this common interest will fail. So why do they do it? Well, you notice that this is a motion to proceed and requires a cloture vote. So 40 of us can stop that bill, and will stop that bill in the condition that it's in without having gone to committee. But when we stop at things, you see, those Republicans think that students ought to be paying more interest. That's the part that's wrong. The part that we're disagreeing about is how to pay for it. Pay for it? We have an economic judgment day coming in this country because of the debt that we're running up on a daily basis. I'm not sure what's going to happen now that France has decided they're not going to have austerity and Greece has decided they're not going to have austerity. That's what put the world into kind of this funk anyway. And now they have leaders that say that they're going to fight any kind of austerity. Could put the world in a real crisis. But what we're talking about is whether to keep the student interest at the low rate that it is right now. And we're going to have to vote on a bill that we're going to have to defeat because of the pay-for on it, which will make it look like Republicans want to raise the rates on students. And that's not true. But the majority prefers to pick a fight rather than help the students during these tough economic times. And what do I mean by this? After initially reaching out to my staff, indicating their willingness to work toward a bipartisan solution, they leaked their proposal before talking to us when it contained the offset that they've got in here. There could be a solution. We have to counter with one and ask that there can be two side-by-side bills. That means that we can have one that they vote against, so we can say they didn't want to keep student rates low, which is also wrong. But somehow we've got to figure this out, and we've got to do it in a bipartisan way, and that means that probably neither suggestion that's up there right now is the one that's going to work. The majority would have Americans believe that the bill simply closes a loophole used by wealthy doctors and lawyers and other professionals that organize as an S corporation in order to avoid payroll taxes. Well, let me tell you about taxes. If you're in one of those small business S corporations, you pay your taxes. You pay it on the year that the company earns it, not the year that the dividends are distributed. The year that the company earns it, you pay all of the taxes that are due on that piece of money. Even though you have to leave it in your business so you can keep reinventing your business, so you can stay in business, so you can maintain the jobs that you already have, and hopefully add a few. That's what an S corporation does. It says, we're going to give you this big break. We're going to let you pay your taxes up front even though you can't take the money out. But what we're talking about here is payroll taxes. Now, payroll taxes are the money that all of us put into as an investment for our Social Security and our Medicare. That's what payroll taxes are. That's what we're talking about now, charging on this money that up front has had all the income taxes paid on it, and incidentally have also had payroll taxes paid on it. The IRS is already given the authority to check and see if people are taking out a de minimis distribution. There's an amount you have to take out of your business, and you have to claim it for salary. You can't just hide it if like you were rich or something. It doesn't work that way. The IRS has rules. The IRS can claim those payroll taxes. But what we're talking about now is taking those payroll taxes. Payroll taxes, remember, are Social Security and Medicare payments. They're investments in your Social Security and your Medicare. We're talking about taking those and subsidizing student loans. Medicare is in trouble. And once again, we're talking about stealing from Medicare. We did that in the health care bill. We took $500 billion out of Medicare, and we put it into new programs. We didn't put it into a doc fix. You keep hearing us talk about the doc fix. We're not paying the docs enough that they want to take any new Medicare patients. Well, we didn't take the money in Medicare that might have been used and used it in Medicare to keep the Medicare system growing. No, we put it into new programs so that we could say that this health care plan was paid for. That's what the payroll taxes are. Now we're saying we're going to use those payroll taxes and we're going to use it to subsidize the student loans. When does Medicare ever get the money to pay for Medicare? Oh, that's right. We have a new board now, an unelected board, and this unelected board will tell us each and every year where we have to cut in Medicare in order to pay for Medicare, even though we stripped all this other money out that could have paid for Medicare. What a deal. Well, here we go again. This tax would end the payroll taxes and by shifting them into the student loans. When we're talking about pay-fors, we do all kinds of crazy things around here. And we shouldn't be doing it. We should be a little bit more straightforward, not just with the students, but with the American taxpayer. In reality, this is an irresponsible tax increase on small businesses at a time when we need small businesses creating jobs so college students have employment opportunities when they graduate. In Wyoming, S corporations are family-owned small businesses working hard to keep their businesses afloat. As I mentioned, they get to pay their taxes even if they can't draw the money out and use it. So, for instance, small motels, small architecture firms, and groups of engineers might choose to operate as S corporations. Or they could be a full corporation, and then they'd have some of the same benefits that Warren Buffett has. You know, Warren Buffett makes millions, and he doesn't have to pay payroll taxes on that. But we didn't suggest ending Warren Buffett's payroll tax-free money. We're only going to do this to the small business corporations. Sounds fair? I don't think so. So this will also hurt family businesses in another way. For example, a son who's taking an accounting practice from his father could be hit with substantial payroll taxes if he owns, for example, 10% of the firm, while his father, who's no longer active in the business, retains the other 90%. These are not the tax scofflaws that the majority suggests this law will impact. They're really small businessmen that are the fabric of the American economy. The small businesses account for 65% of the 15 million jobs created between 1993 and 2009. 65% of the 15 million jobs created between 1993 and 2009. So rather than increasing taxes on small engineering and accounting firms, we should be encouraging these businesses to hire new employees. As a former small businessman, I know this will not happen if we raise taxes on the very businesses we depend upon to turn the labor market around. So recent reports demonstrate the need to encourage rather than inhibit job growth and creation. That's what we're talking about, jobs. This year, more than 50% of the college graduates are either unemployed or underemployed. Graduating in a bad economy where jobs are scarce and lower wages are the norms can have a negative economic consequence for up to 15 years. With the cost of higher education increasing more rapidly than the median family income, there will continue to be greater dependence on student loans. Unless the economy improves, there will also be a lesser chance that going forward graduates will have the resources to even make minimum loan payments. So the Republican alternative puts forward a solution that takes money out of, and I know that the senator from Iowa hates the word, a slush fund, but it's a fund with rather wide possibilities, and a fund that can be designated by the secretary. So, and this isn't the first time that this has been used as an offset. Our president signed legislation that cut $5 billion from the fund to offset that payroll tax bill. Now, we're talking about payroll taxes here again, but we're not talking about, our side's talking about using the same source the president used for the other ones. So the president also proposed to cut an additional $4.5 billion out of that fund when he submitted his budget for this year. So I had to go and look and see what some of the uses are for this fund that we'd be cutting into. because it's spent at the discretion of the Secretary of Health and Human Services, and there aren't a lot of guidelines. Many of the programs funded by this Prevention and Public Health Fund, often called a slush fund, duplicates existing health programs or wastes taxpayer money on some frivolous programs. The fund has wasted millions of taxpayer dollars and even supported potentially unlawful lobbying activity. For instance, a public health clinic in Nashville, Tennessee used money to offer free preventive services for dogs and cats, not women and children. $3.6 million went to the Minnesota Department of Health to create at least 4 regional food policy councils to increase the access and available of affordable, healthy food. $8.4 million to the New York Fund for Public Health to implement a local tax on sugar-sweetened beverages. $3.3 million to the Washington State Department of Health to increase local control, preemption of tobacco marketing and taxation, and support legislation that repeals preemption of tobacco marketing. $3 million to lobby lawmakers in New York for legislation requiring chain restaurants to publicly post the amounts of the calories they serve. $7 million to the Jefferson County, Alabama, to urge Alabama lawmakers to raise tobacco taxes. $16 million to the County of Los Angeles to help secure a ban on new fast food restaurants around Los Angeles. A lot of that's lobbying activity. Yeah, I suppose that the end result could be prevention of health. This country is coming up on an economic judgment day. We don't have extra money laying around. In fact, when we're talking about pay-fors, we're only talking about paying for whatever new is put in. We don't talk about how we're going to cover the $15 trillion in debt that we've got out there, the $49,000 that every man, woman, and child in the United States owes. It's a heavy burden. I talked earlier about Greece. Greece only owes $39,000 per person. They're just not trusted as much as the United States. But if we keep running up that debt, we're not going to be trusted either. So, unfortunately, President Obama and the congressional Democrats would rather play election year politics than find a solution that focuses on the immediate need of America's students and their families. Neither bill is ideal. Each spends 10 years of savings in 1 year, and neither produces a long-term sustainable solution. However, the Republican proposal has the benefit of using an offset previously used by the Democrats, as I mentioned. The $5 billion from that fund was used to help pay for the extension of the payroll tax holiday, and then in this year's budget he has another $4 billion. The Democrat bill raises taxes on small businesses at a time when the nation needs those businesses to be creating jobs so college students have employment opportunities when they graduate. And it's really discriminating against small businesses because it doesn't take in corporate dividends that people get, which are the same thing. It's the dividends that they eventually are able to take out of a business, but a big corporation pays dividends to the investors, and those don't have payroll taxes taken out either. So no sincere attempt was made by the Democrats to find a bipartisan solution. Both Senator Reid and Senator Harkin reached out to my staff to inquire about the possibility of finding a solution. My staff expressed a willingness to discuss possible offsets, but the Democrats released the details of their proposed S-corporation tax prior to any meeting. Now, when my staff did meet with Senator Harkin's office, his staff indicated the S-corporation offset was the only offset the Democrats were willing to consider. That makes compromise pretty difficult. Senator Reid has filed for cloture on S-2343, this bill that we're talking about, the Democrat version of it, and a vote will be held tomorrow at noon. And at that point, we've been told that our version, even though we're the minority, so unless we pulled some majority people over, would not have a majority vote, and if they all voted together, theirs would win. But we've been told that we're not going to have a vote on our bill at all. So that's to make it look like when cloture tomorrow fails, because there'd be no opportunity to put any amendments on this bill, and this is not a perfectly drafted bill. This is something that was put together in a bit of a hurry without having bipartisan input. You know, the reason we have 535 people in Congress is so that there are a whole bunch of different viewpoints. The reason we have 21 people on a committee is so that there are 21 viewpoints that go into the bill and can see what unintended consequences there are. Didn't happen on this bill. This has been put together by 2 or 3 people or half dozen staff members or whatever, I'm not sure. But it has not had the input from both sides. So our side had to come up with a bill that follows the same procedure. And I can tell you that neither bill is ideal. And a solution has to be reached for these young people. And we're all agreed on that. We're just not agreed on how we pay for it. And we do have a problem with paying for things around here. So I urge the majority leader to pull the bill from the floor, sit down with us, find a solution that all can agree to. And this isn't an issue over election year politics that should prevent us from reaching a bipartisan agreement. I'm not aware of anybody that's opposed to the extension of the reduction in the interest rate. And incidentally, that's not an interest rate reduction to everybody. It's only to those who have subsidized loans. If you're a student who has regular loans, you're not getting to participate in this, but that would require a lot more money to do it. So again, I urge the majority leader to pull this bill, sit down, come up with a solution that both sides can agree on. It's getting tougher and tougher to find pay-fors because we're getting further and further in the hole, and we're not going to stop digging, so we better start digging together. I yield the floor.
Mr. President, how much time is remaining on our side on this debate?
Senator from Iowa, there is no allocation of time, evidently.
But Senator, am I correct that the time for debate on this bill will expire at 4 p.m.?
At 4:30.
At 4:30. I thank the chair. Well, Mr. President, after listening to the previous 3 speakers, it's hard to know where to begin to correct the record with all of the misstatements. So maybe I'll kind of work backward. My good friend from Wyoming gave a whole list of different things about where this money was spent, mentioned something about California and fast food construction. I didn't get it all, but I'm informed that there was absolutely no money from the Prevention and Public Health Fund that went for that program. If my friend has any evidence to the contrary, I would be more than delighted to look at it. And then there was the one about the dogs and cats in Nashville, Tennessee. I thought the newspaper article that was in the Hill newspaper put that one to rest, but I guess it didn't. It just goes on and on. That money also did not come. That money went, actually was funded by a private grant money. I guess PetSmart, from what I'm told, put that money in for pet spaying and neutering in Nashville, Tennessee. So again, that money did not come from the Prevention and Public Health Fund. Again, if my friend from Wyoming has any evidence to the contrary, I'd like to look into that. And then there was he mentioned the New York Department of Health used $3 million to lobby in New York for a soda tax initiative. Well, first of all, Mr. President, I would tell my good friend from Wyoming that there is an absolute prohibition on federal monies being used for lobbying. So if anyone has any evidence of federal funds being used for lobbying, please let us know. We'd like to take them to task for that and sic the Justice Department on them. So that just didn't happen. It was not CDC funding. This was funding by the New York State Department of Health. So, again, none of the CDC money that we used that was in the prevention fund was used for that. So those were just 3 of, I don't know how many examples my friend from Wyoming had, but those were just 3 of them there that absolutely had nothing to do with the Prevention and Public Health Fund. But somehow, this has kind of gotten out in the popular press that that, that the city of Nashville received $7.5 million grant to provide free pet spaying and neutering. Well, you put that out there, and the radio talk shows pick up on that, and all that kind of stuff, and they bat this around, and it gets everyone upset. My God, we're using tax money now to neuter dogs and cats in Nashville, Tennessee. Who wouldn't be opposed to that? Well, it's just not true. That's all. It's just simply not true. And like I say, if anyone has any evidence to the contrary, please let me know. And we'll get the Justice Department after them. Now, again, I say to my friends on this side of the aisle that talking about seriousness of whether or not how we're going to pay for this. I heard it said by the previous three speakers that we all agree that the interest rate should not go up. Okay. But we have before us, as I understand, two choices right now. The Republican choice is the one passed by the House of Representatives a couple of weeks ago, which would eliminate the Prevention and Public Health Fund and put that money in to keep the interest rate down at 3.4% rather than letting it go up to 6.8%. So they would eliminate the Prevention and Public Health Fund, about which I spoke at length a little while ago. Our bill would close a loophole in the tax code that allows certain subchapter S corporations to avoid paying their FICA taxes, their Social Security and Medicare taxes, because of the way they're arranged. Now, I'm going to get into that in a minute and try to explain exactly how that's set up. We're not going after small businesses at all. We're simply providing, I think, more of a bright line on what are legitimate dividends from a corporation which don't have to pay FICA taxes, and what are really salaries, wages, salaries, that you do have to pay FICA taxes on. Right now, in certain subchapter S corporations, it's kind of cloudy. It's kind of cloudy. And so someone said on the other side, they said, well, we've seen this big increase in subchapter S corporations. Well, of course. People who had partnerships before or sole proprietorships and stuff, all of a sudden are rushing to establish subchapter S corporations with very few stockholders to get away from paying their legitimate taxes on Social Security and Medicare. And so our bill would close that loophole. So we have these two choices, I think, in front of us right now. Which do you want? I mean, if those were the only two, do you want to eliminate the Prevention and Public Health Fund? Or do you want to put a bright line on subchapter S corporations and say, if you cross that line, you've got to pay your Social Security and Medicare taxes? Maybe we can have that vote. Maybe we can actually have that vote here, and I'd like to see if my Republican friends really want to eliminate the Prevention and Public Health Fund. Earlier this year, from our committee, I passed out to every member of the Senate how much money went to the individual states and what it was used for in the Prevention and Public Health Fund, because I want it to be transparent and above board. So I pointed out, for example, these are not private things, these are public. I pointed out to my friend from Tennessee that $4,669,362 was made available to Tennessee in this Prevention and Wellness Fund for fiscal year 2011. And I listed all the things where it went to. Community programs to promote healthy living, detection and prevention of infectious diseases, clinical preventive services, strengthening of public health infrastructure, tobacco prevention programs, some to East Tennessee State University for the training and preparing a public health workforce, Vanderbilt University Medical Center for clinical preventative services. I got right down to the dollar where it all went. I'm not trying to hide anything here. I'd ask my friend from Tennessee, ask these people, what did they do with the money? Where did it all go? We know where it went. Does my friend propose that we cut out all this money that went to the state of Tennessee, or here's Arizona, $7,758,944 went to Arizona in 2011. I gave this to my friend from Arizona, listing exactly where it went and what it went for in prevention and wellness. Does my friend say that this ought to be eliminated? Wyoming got $1,871,534. Every bit of it's listed here exactly where it went. Well, if we accept the Republicans' proposal, we do away with all that. We do away with all prevention and public health fund. Now it's been said on the other side that even our president wanted to do away with it or take money out of it. I would point out that the president did propose earlier this year as a pay-for the extension of the unemployment insurance program and for other things to keep tax rates from going up, that we took $5 billion out of this program over the life. But I think the president made it very clear that was it. In fact, we have a statement of policy, a statement of administration policy on this bill which states unequivocally the president will veto this bill if there's any cut in the Prevention and Public Health Fund. So, again, while I personally was opposed to the $5 billion that the president proposed taking out and was taken out of the fund, I can say that, well, that ought to be the last penny taken out of the Prevention and Public Health Fund. The last. No more. I think now we see the president agrees. No more. We took $5 billion out, and that's the end of it. And then people keep calling it a slush fund, a slush fund. As I said, I have where every dollar went in all of the states in this country and what it went for. And it did not go to neuter dogs in Nashville, Tennessee. Regardless of how many times you may read it or hear it on Rush Limbaugh or Joe Scarborough or someplace else. You can hear it every day, and it's still not true. I challenge anyone, if they have that evidence, let's see it. So again, I just think that what the Republicans have offered as an offset is not serious. I mean, I just can't believe they want to really do away with the Prevention and Public Health Fund. On the other hand, is our proposal serious? Do we really want to close this loophole on the subchapter S? Yes, we do. I think that is serious. Because there's been a lot of abuse of people using the cover of subchapter S to avoid paying their correct share of taxes. A number of cases have come before us that I've seen where people have used the subchapter S as a means of paying their fair share of taxes. One of the examples that just came through was former Senator John Edwards of North Carolina, former member of this body, former presidential candidate, vice presidential candidate. I'm not going to get into his personal stuff. That's something else. But former Senator John Edwards of North Carolina claimed over a multi-year period that $26 million in revenue from his subchapter S corporation was unearned. He claimed that he didn't really work for a large share of his income from winning court cases. By making this argument, he saved nearly $750,000 in payroll taxes. That's not fair. That's a gimmick. It's a gimmick when you allow a professional to give his or her spouse and children 95% of the stock in their subchapter S corporation and then declare it's their profit and not their work as an accountant or as a lawyer that's responsible for the income. That's a gimmick. That's why people are rushing to form these subchapter S's. We have a case here, a recent case, where the taxpayer was an S corporation accounting practice entirely owned by a CPA and his wife. That's the corporation. The CPA served as the corporation's president, treasurer, director, and only full-time accountant, but received no salary. Imagine that. He received no salary. Instead, the CPA, quote, donated his services to the corporation and withdrew earnings from the entity in the form of dividend distributions. During the years under audit, the CPA worked for the corporation approximately 36 hours per week. In addition to testifying that his work was crucial to the continued success of the corporation's business, the CPA also indicated that dividends were drawn in lieu of salary to reduce employment taxes. Imagine that. The corporation asserted that the CPA was not an employee, and even if he was an employee, dividend distributions cannot be taxed as wages. Well, the tax court, well, he was caught in an audit. Caught in an audit. But we know audits are few and far between. So the court found the shareholder to be an employee who had performed significant services. Since wages encompassed all remuneration for services, the court held that the dividends constituted wages for employment tax purposes. So that's what's happening. That's what's happening out there. So what does our bill do? Our bill, see, right now, if you're in a, kind of in a subchapter S corporation, you, the person, get to kind of decide whether or not what you're making is income or dividends. I heard it mention something about Warren Buffett. Well, I don't know Warren Buffett's whole deal, but it seems to me that most of his income is from dividends. We're not talking about that here. We're talking about this would be, if we took the subchapter S situation and applied it to subchapter C corporations, which Mr. Buffett would be in, then we would let Mr. Buffett decide whether or not his dividends were salary or dividends. How do you think he would decide? He would decide they were dividends. Now, under the subchapter S corporation, we're saying, okay, you get to decide. Are they dividends or are they salary? Well, what do you think people are going to mostly decide? And, again, this is information that we received basically from Treasury, is that if an accountant sort of tells an S-chapter corporation, well, you can do 40%. 40% you won't get audited. So they just do 40%, they don't get audited, and they don't have to pay Social Security or Medicare taxes on that. So what do we do in this bill? We just say that, look, if you're a subchapter S corporation and you have fewer than 3 shareholders, fewer than three, then we draw a bright line. We draw a bright line, and if your income is over $250,000 a year for a joint filer, then, and if in fact that there was not earned income, then it would be subject to FICA taxes. Then it would be subject to FICA taxes. That's the bright line that we're drawing here. In fact, what it will do is it will give subchapter S corporations a better idea of whether or not they're earning money as income or earning it as dividends. So quite frankly, not only are we helping raise money for the Medicare and Social Security Trust Fund, we're actually making it better for people out there who may not know where they fall. Is it dividend or is it earned income? So our bill only covers a very narrow share of S corporations, and it deals only with certain professional corporations. It does not touch manufacturing or retail activities. It does not touch real estate activities. It covers the area where the abuse is most prevalent right now. Now, I want to speak for just a minute on what Senator Alexander was talking about earlier about the money that came from students and whether or not it was given back to students. He said instead of 6.8% should have been 5.3%. We voted on that. We voted on that, and it failed. It failed. It failed. So we did speak on that. But again, what I would point out is that most of this money, most of the money that we had in that savings, that $61 billion, most of that indeed went for students. I think I had, yes. About, of that $61 billion, $36 billion basically went to Pell Grants, helping raise Pell Grant awards. $750 million went to bolster college access for students through the College Access Challenge Grant Program. $2.55 billion went to historically black colleges and universities and minority-serving institutions. $2 billion went to community colleges. So about $10 billion was used for deficit reduction. $9.2 billion, as I said, went to certain health care activities. Guess what one of those was that it paid for? Requiring dependent coverage, saying that a young person, a person could stay on his or her parents' health care policy until age 26. Now, does that help students or not? Of course it helps students. How many young people go off to college? They are in college, maybe they drop out a little bit to work, make money, they come back into college. Maybe they even graduate, but they don't have a full-time job. They can stay on their parents' policy until they're age 26. I can't tell you how many people I have heard from in my own state of Iowa who said what a godsend this is to them and their students and the kids in their family who are students. So I make no apologies for the fact that some of this money out of that $61 billion that went to subsidize banks went to help students stay on their parents' health care policy. So when you say that some of the money came from students, no, it didn't. The money, the $61 billion, all came from cutting the subsidy to banks. And the great bulk of it, I said all but about, well, $10 billion to pay the deficit, pay down on the deficit, and $9.2 billion went to things like banning lifetime limits, requiring dependent coverage, expanding community health centers, that type of thing that was used. So none of it, as I said, really actually came from students themselves. It all came from the closing the loophole that banks were making on that money. The next thing that was said here that I wanted to correct was that the Medicaid expansion in the Affordable Care Act, I want to make it clear that 100% of that expansion is paid for in the federal side, not the state sides. I think it was Senator Alexander was talking about this and saying that we're increasing we're expanding Medicaid, which is a burden on the states. Well, that would be true, but for the fact that 100% of this expansion is paid for by the federal government. that phases down to, I think, 90% sometime in the future, but it never comes below 90%. Now, if the senator would like to debate Medicaid should be all federal or federal and state, we could debate that and maybe even find some common ground on it, but that's not the case here before us. I did not think that the debate on this bill to keep student interest rates low would now morph into a debate on health care. But if you want to have the debate on health care, I'm more than happy to do so, and whether or not we should use money from the Prevention and Public Health Fund to pay for it. So again, I would say that no money comes out of the Medicare Trust Fund to pay for this bill. None. And certainly none comes out of the Social Security Trust Fund. The money that is raised goes to the Social Security Trust Fund and Medicare Trust Fund. None of it comes in to pay for keeping the interest rates at 3.4%. Under the budget rules that we are operating under, money raised can be used as an offset, even though that money is raised for Social Security or Medicare. I want to make it crystal clear that the money that we are raising from closing this loophole on subchapter S corporations, that money, none of it goes for student loans or to keep the interest rate low. What it does do is it goes to Medicare and Social Security Trust Fund. But under the Republican proposal, we would not get any more money into Medicare or Social Security. They would just do away with the Prevention and Public Health Fund, take that money, use it to offset keeping the interest rates low, but not one nickel of that would go to Medicare or Social Security. Our bill would. So our bill kind of really has three benefits. One, it closes a tax loophole, provides for more definitive application of what is a subchapter S income or dividends, earned income or unearned income. Secondly, it provides money to the Social Security Trust Fund and Medicare Trust Fund, which is needed. And third, it allows these student interest rate loans for subsidized loans to remain at 3.4% for the next year. And sometime in the next year, obviously, we're going to have to figure out a longer-term fix for this, or what we want to do on the subsidized loans in the future, and how we're going to pay for this down the road. In the meantime, as everyone has said on both sides, we both agree that it ought to stay at 3.4% for the next year. So the debate, I guess, does revolve around how we pay for it. Now, again, from my viewpoint, they want to, and not my viewpoint, the House already voted on this. They voted last week to kill the Prevention and Public Health Fund. And that's what the Republicans are proposing here. Again, to refer back to where I started earlier this afternoon, the lead editorial in the New York Times today, I think, was quite clear. The finding is published in the New England Journal of Medicine, finding out about what's happening with type 2 diabetes, how devastating that's going to be in the future. And when they said, but the long-term goal should be prevention of obesity and diabetes. The editorial said, congressional Republicans, meanwhile, are bent on dismantling health care reforms that could greatly assist in curbing the obesity epidemic. The Republican-dominated House last month narrowly passed a bill that would eliminate a Prevention and Public Health Fund established under the reform law, in part to pay for lowering the interest rate on subsidized student loans for a year. As the editorial said, there is no explanation for this move except for the usual anti-health care reform demagoguery. They pointed out how the fund is already providing grants to state and local governments to help pay for programs to fight obesity and prevent chronic diseases, including diabetes, in the community, the workplace, and among minority groups. So That's really, I guess, the argument. How do we pay for it? I would say that comes as no surprise, I'm sure, that I think closing this loophole is much better than doing away with the Prevention and Public Health Fund. That, Mr. President, I yield the floor.
Mr. President?
Senator from Wyoming.
Mr. President, I said it before, and I'm going to say it again. Neither option is ideal. These oughtn't be the options that we're voting on. But actually, we're not going to get to vote on two options. We're going to get to vote on one option, because this is a cloture vote. When that cloture vote fails, and it will fail because it's not a good enough bill to pass, it's not enough good enough bill to get 60 votes, so it will fail. And when it fails, the only purpose of it failing is to say, look at those Republicans that killed that bill. There could be a solution, but it isn't a solution by bringing a bill directly to the floor and saying, take it or leave it. It's got to be a solution by sending it to committee, having the people there work out a way that it can be done. And we've done that in our committee a number of times. And the bills that go to our committee and then come to the floor are pretty successful. But this one did not go to committee. So it isn't really two choices that we're getting, it's one choice. We can take it the way the Democrats wrote it, or we can forget it. Now, they say that this closes a loophole, because if there are 3 shareholders or less, now I already heard people, I could hear their minds saying, okay, if I want to cheat on that, and you've now taught me how I can, I'll add a 4th person. Now your bill doesn't cover it. So it's not written properly. You're not going to stop them by doing what you got written in the bill. So it's not going to generate any revenue, and if it doesn't generate any revenue, it's not going to pay for the cost of keeping the health care down. Besides that, the IRS has guidelines that say how much you should be taking out of your business as wages, and you have to pay a payroll tax on that, or you will be taken to tax court. And that's what that one case is that the senator from Iowa referred to. It was a case of an accountant who got caught and taken to tax court and told that he can't cheat on his taxes. Now, we ought to have more enforcement like that. And it should be pretty easy for the IRS to check and see if there are some S corporations out there that aren't paying any wages. Any wages? That should be a little computer check, since so much of it has to, actually every return gets turned into a digital return now. Some of them you can help the IRS by sending your form in digitally to begin with, which saves a lot of input by somebody's part. But they could check in a matter of seconds, S corporations that have no wages. And if they have no wages, perhaps they ought to have a much lower limit than what the other side is suggesting. If we're going to do tax reform, we've got to do tax reform. To do it this way is the wrong way. Now, I also heard the comment that this money is not being taken from Medicare and Social Security. Well, the way that we do federal accounting, and we should be ashamed of the way we do federal accounting, that can be a true statement. But in fact, it is not true. Here's how we do it. Here's how we cook the books as a federal government. We will collect this tax that should go to Medicare and Social Security. And we will put bonds in a drawer, and we will spend the money on the reduction in interest rates for the students. That's spending it twice, because we're still showing it over here as owing it to the Social Security and the Medicare folks. But we do this all the time. Do you know how much money there actually is in the drawer called Social Security? Nothing. There are bonds in there. I used to listen to Senator Hollings, Democrat from South Carolina, talking about how we were looting Social Security, looting it. Because all we do is put bonds in a drawer and we spend the money. And we've been doing that for decades. And so the deficit that we're talking about is probably considerably greater than what we're willing to admit. But that's what we're going to be doing here once again. We're going to be looting Social Security and Medicare and providing some loopholes for them to keep on doing the same thing if they've been doing it. We're going to have to get the IRS on that and get it going better. But so if you're going to have two options, and there ought to be a lot more options. That's what we're not doing here, is getting together and figuring out more options, more ways to take care of all of the problems that students are having, and they're going to be demanding a whole lot more than what we're doing. And I would remind the Democrats that the President did take $5 million from this prevention fund, and I heard he said that was enough. Well, if that was enough, how come his new budget includes another $4.5 billion out of that fund? So he doesn't think that's enough. He thinks there's still more there that can be taken. $4.5 billion, this is a $6 billion project that we're talking about here, so $1.5 billion another way. We're just talking past each other. And that's what happens anytime a bill comes to the floor here. If this is the only place we get to debate it, notice how many of my colleagues are listening to me right now. Yeah, if there are two people on the floor here, it usually means that one's getting ready to speak and is not listening to what's being said. That is not a debate. That's not a way to come up with solutions. What we've got to do is send these things to committee. Now, Senator Harkin and I have a way of working on bills in committee, and that's to have people turn in their amendments a couple of days ahead of time. And we look at those, and you would be surprised how many times an amendment by a Republican is almost the same as an amendment by a Democrat. The trick is to get the two of them to sit down together and figure out which words need to be changed so that they can both take credit for it. So this is a frustrating process, the wrong way to do it, but I have to answer one more thing yet, and that's that I cited some cases of where funds were being used from that prevention fund that I thought were wrong, and I do think are wrong. And the senator said that if we had some information on that, if we give it to him, that he would make sure that the Department of Justice gets on it. Well, now we not only need to have the IRS working, we got to have the Department of Justice working a little bit, because there is some pretty good evidence, I think, that some money has been spent for lobbying, in some cases called advocacy, but it's by people working their legislators over, and that, in my opinion, is lobbying. So I do hope that this bill will be referred to committee, which is where it deserves to be, so that a solution can be worked out. And so I would hope that if we do have that cloture vote tomorrow, instead of having the bill pulled, that both sides would join in saying send it to committee and vote against cloture. I yield the floor.
Mr. President.
The senator from Iowa.